Hello, my name is Dr. Tom Graves, and a couple of you may have seen me a couple weeks ago when Curtis had me speak on antibodies in general. And this week, Curtis asked me to speak to you about bad antibodies. And some of you may notice the sling that I'm wearing. Since I saw you last, I had my right shoulder replaced from an old football injury when I was 17 years old, but it's doing great. Anyway, let's talk about what a bad antibody is. First of all, to look at a bad antibody, let's review what a good antibody is. And that is a protein that is perfectly designed by our body in response to an infection. So if we have an invader that comes in, a bacteria or a virus, our body perfectly designs an antibody to counterattack that invader. And it's somewhat of a miracle that it happens as quickly as it is, because if we look at the genetic sequence of these, it's really quite a major accomplishment for our body. So we have good antibodies that fight off these invaders, and that's really good because without them, we would all be dead rather quickly. But when we ask, what is a bad antibody? And in actuality, I don't want to confuse the situation, but there's two kinds of bad antibodies. The first bad antibody is one that gets made but doesn't really confer protection to us the way that we might hope it does. In this case, I think of bad as a bad baseball player or a bad football player. They're there, they're on the team, but they just either don't work well or don't work at all. But amazingly, there's a line in the Bible that St. Paul wrote called Romans 8:28. It said, God uses all things good and bad for the good of those who love them. And he can even use these kinds of bad antibodies to help us. There is some evidence that when we suffer really bad infections, that our frontline good antibodies can't do the work. These bad antibodies are summoned off the bench, almost like the bench warmers get into the game and do the work that the first guys couldn't do. Which sounds like a great movie, doesn't it? The starting players couldn't get it done, but then the bench warmers come in and catch the football to win the game. But there's a second kind of bad antibody, and this analogy to me really parallels angels, because as we know, angels were created to protect us, to serve us, to be good and to be in the function of God. But these other bad antibodies are kind of like the fallen angels. They're antibodies that actually attack our own body. And the analogy I like to make with my patients with these kinds of antibodies are like those old World War II ships, the battleships. Remember, they had those big cannons and they'd shoot boom, 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 big, huge bullets at the enemy when they were attacking. And what happens, that's like our immune system. Like the ship is our immune system, and they're shooting those antibodies out against the enemy. But what would happen if that big gun turned around and shot us? Boom, boom, boom. It doesn't make any sense, and I can't tell you that I understand why it's there, but that's exactly what happens. These bad antibodies cause a set of diseases that we call autoimmune disease. So we say auto because we're doing it ourselves. It's our immune system, the immune system, and disease. And that's a disease where our own immune system attacks us. There are many of these, and I'm sure you've heard of several of them. Think of rheumatoid arthritis, which is different than old age arthritis where we've worn our joints down. Rheumatoid arthritis, our antibodies are attacking our joints, and it can be much more severe and disabling. And left untreated when it's active, it can have a 5-year death rate like many cancers. So thank God we have medicines that we can use against them. There are other diseases like lupus, multiple sclerosis, where it attacks parts of our brain and our body gets very weak. Type 1 diabetes, where the antibodies attack the pancreas and we can no longer make insulin. So type 1 diabetics have what we call an absolute need of insulin. They have to shoot insulin or get a pump because without it, they'll die. as opposed to type 2 diabetes where there's lots of other pills and medications. There's a disease called ulcerative colitis that attacks our colon, Crohn's disease that attacks our ileum, and is just a devastating illness, scleroderma that gets all our connective tissues, and even psoriasis. Many of you that are old enough will remember the commercials on TV, the heartbreak of psoriasis. And the heartbreak is we can't cure it. Most of these autoimmune diseases we can't cure. We can treat them, but we can't cure them. One autoimmune disease we can cure has my name, Graves' disease, and it's no relationship to me, but back in the old days, if you were the doctor that discovered a disease, your name would be attached to it. So Dr. Graves found an antibody disease where it attacks the thyroid gland, which sits at the bottom of our neck, and destroys it. So this disease, we have a couple ways to cure it. One is we give you radioactive iodine that gets sequestered in the neck, and it irradiates the whole thyroid gland and kills it. Then you take a thyroid pill for the rest of your life, but you cured the disease. The second way is to surgically cut the thyroid out. So what do we do? So we have these bad antibodies. They're attacking our body and in many cases causing all kinds of horrible, horrible symptoms, disabilities, and even death. We use medications that shut down the immune system. And that sounds crazy, but we have an overactive immune system, so we just try to stifle it. And that's why you hear those ads on TV like Humira where they say, you may end up getting an infection like pneumonia because with your immune system tying one hand behind your back, you may not be able to fight off those infections. But the good news is the medications in the vast majority of cases do great with very few side effects. And while to advertise on TV, they make us list that horrible list of side effects. In most cases, they don't happen. I always tell my patient, imagine if Ford Motor Company made us write down and read off on a Ford commercial all the things, your head could get cut off, you could break your neck, you could crush your arm, you could die in a car accident, you could lose your legs, but for some reason, for cars, we don't do that, but medications we do. But that's a whole nother topic, and I'm going down a rabbit hole. So anyway, that's my little bit on good and bad antibodies. And I'm hoping to be with you next week. If anyone has any questions, start formulating them. I'm by no means an expert. I'm a family doctor, but I am very interested and I would be happy to answer any questions you have. God bless you and have a great night.